Bryce, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Oh man, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, listen, maybe we can kick things off here today with you telling listeners a little bit more about your background and your journey to your current roles today.
Cool. I'm a mental performance coach. I work as part of the Canadian Sport Institute network. So basically, I work as a sports scientist alongside lots of other colleagues who service our national teams here in Canada. Um, Primarily, I work with our women's national team in the sport of basketball. So I'm spending a ton of time with them. I'm fully integrated with that team. So I go everywhere they go and connect with the athletes quite a bit in between phases and in between competitions. And anything that needs to be done in the psychology space in that program, I take the lead on that. So that's been a really cool experience. So far, I kind of hopped on there after the Rio Olympics in 2016. So pretty much 4 years now I've been involved with that group. Other than that, I have gone to multiple world championships with different Hockey Canada groups on the men's side. I've gone to multiple world championships with our canoe kayak national team. And then, obviously aside from that, lots of things more locally and work with as many people as I can to keep mastering the craft, I guess. But that's kind of what I do. I have a master's degree in a master's of science in kinesiology from Dalhousie University. And my thesis was focused on sports psychology and things like attention and imagery. So definitely not a super skilled researcher, more of an applied person. So I hope that's a welcomed perspective on this podcast.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, knowledge applied is what we're after here. And,
right.
You'd sent over the schematic there, the model around this intersection between values and skills and traits. And I'm going to put that up in the show notes so listeners have a look at that even before this conversation to really orient yourselves. And so, Bryce, maybe to kick things off here, where should we start in this model to start to unpack things? We're going to touch on each of these factors, but where's a good place to start between the values, skills, and traits when we're talking mental performance?
Oh yeah, I mean this is a really cool intersection, and I'm really happy we're talking about it. I think it's an important topic, in lots of different contexts, but in high performance sport, because those three factors, values, skills, and traits, are all in their own way directly related to our motivational system. So, basically, like, why do I enjoy taking part in this activity and being in this environment? When you start there and then you kind of trace it back, it's always really connected to not just one thing, but those three things. And, a little more specifically, I think those three factors are, in my opinion, at the core of all cultural breakdowns or all, cultural mastery in a way. So, if there's ever something that's really gone astray in a team culture, and that could be the players or the staff or the organization as a whole, it normally traces back to these three things, because in the end, it's just humans working together, and all humans have values that are really meaningful to them, but not the same as everybody else. All humans have traits that are really distinctive, but not, the same as anybody else. And everyone seems to be on a different spectrum in terms of the skills that they have, both mentally and physically. So I think they're really important. All three of these things play a huge role in performance.
Yeah, it's interesting to see when we look at these intersections, when you look at resilience, vulnerability, creativity. And so, if if a coach is listening in or someone who works on a performance staff, in a perfect situation, when we talk about building out a team, why should we be considering each of these factors, or is there a place to even begin with one being more influential than others?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I guess I'd start by saying I think in sport performance, and this is just my opinion, so it may not be the same as everybody else, but I think in sport performance and in sports science, the default kind of mode that we all have is that everything is a skill. it's, it's a really like humanistic way to look at things. It's motivating to see things that way. And, in the spirit of growth mindset, most high performing people in sport want to treat things that way so that they can, convince other people they can get better at things, or know themselves they can get better at things. But I think just by, the nature of how people work together, this default view ends up making our lives much harder when it comes to things like culture and social dynamics. And culture and social dynamics are, it's like water. Like water takes the shape of anything you pour it into. And culture and social dynamics are kind of like that. They're always happening. It doesn't matter if it's, a conversation in the therapy room with a few other people around listening. It doesn't matter if it's a coach intervening in the biggest moment at the Olympic Games. There's always these dynamics at play. So I think it's really important to consider them all, not just look at skills, but look at the things like, who is this person? What really motivates them? What's going to drive them? How can I connect best with that part of them? And, obviously these three things kind of change at different rates. And, I guess that's really important because there's a hierarchy of kind of rate of change. So if you look at personality traits, kind of that like hardware, if you look at personality as hardware, those are like built in, really inherent inner things that they're going to take a really long time to change. Like if you set out on a mission as a coach or as anyone trying to work with somebody else to change someone's personality to better fit your personality, that's a really tough task. So
sort of like taking an introvert and saying we want extrovert qualities or vice versa. Those things are going to be more hardwired, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, I've seen this so many times where people get so frustrated trying to work with somebody else because they're just wired differently. And this is where this cool intersection happens, is the skill of empathy, which is an emotional intelligence skill, has to become really, really relevant if two people who are wired completely different are going to work really well together.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example of that just kind of recently came up. So as part of our Tokyo pursuit, we've done a thing called Strengths Finder. So a lot of the athletes and staff have done this personality. I guess you'd mostly look at it as a personality traits finder. And so one of our coaches, Carly Clark, who's this amazing coach from Ryerson University, one of her traits that was revealed is that she's very deliberative. So she takes her time when making big decisions. She likes to have like lots of perspectives. Now, I'm on the other hand in a completely different category. I was kind of tagged as an activator. So I like to take action and strike while the iron's hot. These are very, very different personality tendencies. And as soon as we did this, Carly and I looked at each other and we're like, oh my God, this is the root of so much kind of cultural and social conflict. And as a result, her and I have had to learn to anchor our relationships in values like collaboration and excellence. So if we're really different in our personality traits, what can we, come to common ground on, and what do we both value despite how we're wired? And collaboration and excellence are two of those things. And then you pile on top of that the skills that are needed to really make this work. Like the skills are like the glue between these things, and skills like empathy and self-awareness. Then you've got kind of that full package of like, now we're ticking, now we're working well together. But if we just looked at the traits or just looked at the values or just at the skills, the full picture wouldn't be there.
Yeah, so many great things to unpack there. I mean, maybe if we start with that culture side of things, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, talking with guys like Dr. Andrew King at Swansea University, he talks a lot about animal models and how, this leader-follower dynamic. And if we get enough leaders, then that sets the quote-unquote culture, and everything moves smoothly. And of course, if we transition that to sport, we have, the New Zealand All Blacks, or back in the early 2000s, the Boston Red Sox with the no dickheads rule, right? It was like you could, for every kind of I forget if it was maybe 4-to-1. For every 4, you need 4 quality guys to offset that one personality that might start to pull things in opposite directions. And I found it fascinating because Dr. King would talk about meerkats, I think it was, that they would actually forcibly evict a member of their group that was not behaving in the way that was, appropriate for that group, which I thought was fascinating. So if we talk culture and this sort of leader-follower dynamic,
right.
Is that something that we're, a coach or practitioner, we're just given this deck of cards and we're, if we don't have enough leaders, we're going to have to be putting more things into place to kind of support this team dynamic? Or within this model here, do we have enough tools to be able to, create that sort of desired culture, if you will?
Oh man, yeah. Geez, we just keep digging and digging down to like the coolest areas here. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd start by kind of reinforcing that the skills are always going to be the glue that holds really diverse values and traits together. Mm-hmm. So that has to be there in any group. To build on your leadership follower thing. So the way I look at that is you almost have to take it from the lens of entrenchment. So you're trying to entrench athletes in a culture, and to achieve entrenchment, everybody has to be on board. So what you're aiming for here, and that includes every single person in your environment at all times, at any level of the organization, there's certain behaviors that kind of funnel up to certain big organizational values that have to be upheld at every level. And what you're trying to do there is you're trying to instill this sense of like, well, everybody seems to believe in these things, so I better too if I want to thrive in this group. Mm-hmm. Right? So you're creating this vibe of, geez, it really doesn't seem to be acceptable in this group to not value respect when we communicate, let's say. Like, if I don't do that, I'm getting the vibe that I'm not really going to belong here. And that sounds kind of harsh to say it that way, but I think in the best cultures, you do see this sense of entrenchment. It's like you just get enough, hot sticks in the fire that are burning that if you put a wet one in, it's just going to catch quickly. Mm-hmm. But you can't have 50% wet sticks in there and some
fire
sticks
goes
burning.
Out pretty quick,
that
right?
fire's going to either go out or it's going to take forever to get it going.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. And the other piece I wanted to touch in on with you was around that idea of empathy, self-compassion, because again, some conversations around this idea of being able to take a third person's point of view, seeing things from somebody else's point of view, and some of the work by Igor Grossman around wise reasoning. And, he'd mentioned things around, in today's, not millennials, but today's group of young people, obviously they're becoming more and more independent, which is terrific. But also this use of of devices and social media creates more individualization, which does then tend to lead us to more sort of self-interest and narcissism versus thinking of the other person and taking their perspective. And so I suppose it's kind of, what's your opinion around, and maybe we can take this on a couple levels, like between coaches trying to have that sort of being able to view things through their athletes' eyes, or even with younger, whether it's practitioners or athletes, is there, what have you seen in your dealings, and what kind of strategies could people start to lean on?
Yeah, it's, what I've noticed that I guess took me a little bit by surprise. Most people who, work with me or people I work with know that, I don't really spend a lot of time on my phone, and I don't spend a lot of time on social media. And when I got involved with Canada basketball, one of the first things that I had proposed that we do in order to build our sense of connection to one another, and I should preface this with, I really believe that somewhere in the range of 70% of behavior can be influenced most by the environment. So again, in that kind of spirit of entrenchment, how do we create an environment that you kind of slowly drip these situations where certain behaviors emerge, and then it just becomes normal. Like, that's how we do things around here. And this topic that you just brought up is one of them. One of the things I had proposed was no phones at team meals at all.
Mm-hmm.
So don't even bring them. Like, it's not like, have them in your pocket and you can feel it buzzing. It's leave them at the front of the room on a table and put them on silent, or leave them in your room. And, you get a lot of resistance on these things, obviously, when you first do them, especially with, a group of athletes who are somewhere between like 18 and, 30, basically, who spend a lot of time on their phones and are really in that world that you just described. And for like literally 2 years, there was resentment. There was, like, why are we doing this? And then slowly but surely, you could start to see things change, and you would see, we get on the bus to go to practice, and people are continuing on a conversation that started at lunch. And then we get to practice, and the players, have these funny ideas for how to do like a game and warm up that came up at dinner, and so it just starts to really, gain some traction. And then the really cool part of this was we went to a world championship in Spain, and we went to the meal hall where kind of all the teams were eating in the hotel. And there are some moments where all the teams are eating together. And you look around and these teams are buried. Like, they're just buried in their phones. They're not looking at each other. They're not talking. They're like shoveling food into their face, just buried in their phone. And our leadership group on our team came to us and said, the imagery of this is like really now starting to click with us as to why this is so important. When you see another team look like that and then think that we looked like that before, it really hits home that this is effective. So anyway, that kind of went on a tangent around the phone piece. But the thing that I'm really surprised by is there's kind of this modern push, these modern coaches coming into the mix who use their phones so well to better connect with their athletes. And I was like judgmental of it at first, because I was someone who tried to not be on their phone and not get carried away in social media for the right reasons, like to, stay present and experience things as they happen. And then I started realizing there's like all these conversations going on about how people connected over Instagram between coaches and athletes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually missing out here. Like, the coaches who are riding this wave and doing a good job of it are better connected with these athletes than I am. So that's the direction I think it's gone, more than anything else.
It's such an interesting topic too, isn't it? Because it's, like you said, it's almost on a knife's edge of, we want to be able to be in this world and connecting, because again, most athletes and young people are going to be, this is how they communicate, right? Just on the phone. And
oh yeah,
so we want to be part of that. But then at the same time, there are these negative repercussions to this. And so, when you see teams like, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals deciding that we're going to have every half an hour, it's a phone break for the athletes. In your opinion, I guess, where's that balance between allowing us to use a language that the athletes are communicating with and leverage that, but then on the flip side of just, sort of giving in, for lack of a better term, to what these individuals are doing, at a cost. Where's that? Obviously, a difficult question to answer, but in your opinion, kind of where is that maybe sweet spot of how we can enable those conversations without them taking over? Because it is, once it gains momentum, you end up with everyone at the dinner table looking at their phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really big one. I have seen what you're referring to. I've seen these articles on NFL coaches saying that they do 20 minutes of video and then there's like a 10-minute phone break. And I've also heard people compare it to, on a more biological level, to smoking or other addictions. And how do you think your people would perform if if they were smokers and then you just made them quit when they came to training camp? Which is, I think, a really dramatic, way to look at it. I think it's a balance. I don't think there's any it's a lose-lose if anyone dives in and goes, this is just, we're just taking your phones the entire time, and we've put all these really strict rules on when you can use it. And I don't think that's
severs that connection pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I think it breaks down. It basically is like the symbolic moment of like, you don't get me. Like if you put yourself in the athlete's view and the way that they perceive, this means of communication, and then you kind of put that beside this notion of we want to create an environment of belonging. Like, we want to create an environment where people show up and we feel like we have a lot of things in common, despite the fact that we're not all the same. And I think that that's a big one in the sense that it sends a message of like, I don't know if you understand me. And I've seen athletes kind of dig their heels in on that and just never turn the corner. Like they think it's unrealistic, or they think it's over the top, and they just never turn the corner. They never get to that point where they feel like it was reasonable or they saw the value in it. And this actually links back, I think, to like our original core topic on this podcast. And I'll just kind of link it back to that in the sense that it is very difficult to build a skill in an area that someone either A, doesn't value, or B, it's in contradiction to their natural kind of neurobiological wiring. So if we look at that phone one as a skill, right? Like that's what the sport world would tend to do. It's a skill. We just need to teach them and educate and all these things, and then we'll build the skill of being more present or whatever. And there's some of that. But on the bigger picture, in every situation, I think you're going to really struggle to help someone build a skill if you don't consider where it fits in their value system and where it fits in relation to their natural wiring and natural neurobiological systems. That's just a fundamental rule that exists everywhere. I mean, it's as simple as like warm up. I've heard so many coaches complain about warm up. Like, this athlete doesn't warm up seriously. They don't work hard in warm up. This athlete is not focused in warm up. They're talking to other people. Why can't they just warm up properly? And in, almost every one of these conversations, we end up tracing it back to, well, where did they learn this kind of notion of warm up? Like, where did that stem from? Mm-hmm. And when I think of that bigger question, I think of like some of Carol Dweck's work. She's the author of a book called Mindset. And she shares these really cool examples that, one of them would be like the really gifted, quote unquote, gifted or talented students early on in their life basically get in the situation where they watch coaches and teachers give a lot of the other students who aren't as naturally gifted at something, a lot of feedback, and they hear them saying like, you just keep working at it, like just keep working at it to these other students. And so what they end up doing is like attributing hard work and feedback to being less talented. If you're being told you have to work hard, and if you're being told really anything, like you're getting coached a lot,
you must not be as good.
You must not be as good as everybody else. That's the environment that I've, lived in for whatever, like 10, 15 years. So it all comes back to this, when you look at some of these really gifted players and coaches being frustrated in warm up, it's like, well, maybe, their value system got shaped by this Carol Dweck example or something similar to it.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely rings true when you look at, again, from a nutritional standpoint of just why certain athletes will gravitate in terms of things like compliance versus others. And oftentimes there's a component of just the natural level, skill level of an athlete and how that's associated with compliance. And Bryce, if we come back to the values, skills, and traits, as you mentioned there, if we look at, I'm sure coaches and practitioners and docs listening in, if we think of the rate of change of each of these factors, how long might it take to influence some of these, and are some, going to be quicker timelines than others?
Oh yeah, the actual rate of change is something that I really haven't found like a firm answer on that, to be perfectly honest with you. But I'm very confident, I'm very confident in an evidence-based way that personality is going to be the longest rate of change for sure. that one is really difficult. There's new research now that is suggesting that, one of the big 5 personality traits is openness, or openness to experience. And they're now showing that there's some, daily habits and skills and things that you can build in that do influence someone's scores on openness to experience. So they can be influenced. It does take a really long time, like years to kind of couple a personality with different values and some skills to help shift that natural wiring. Years. The values is kind of the middle one. So values,
just to jump in there, that's an important, really important point, isn't it, for practitioners, coaches? This is something that's going to take years to shift. And so if you think that in one visit or one preseason or one season we're going to dramatically change, this is just very unrealistic and sets up a situation where there's going to be, roadblocks and likely failure, right?
Oh man, big time. And this is one of those ones where with personality, in the sport world now, and I've done this on a bunch of different programs and a bunch of different ways, there's a lot of testing going on, or assessing. So, we've done multiple personality assessments with our senior women's team, because the philosophy there is to meet them where they are. Let's meet each other where we are when it comes to personality. So you could do something like the Strengths Finder, or you could do something like the test of attentional and interpersonal style. And those things, are generally viewed as like hardware, right? Like it's like the difference between hardware and software. Like software is what coaches are used to working with, because most, motor systems are more like software. Coaches feel, and they get a lot of feedback that suggests if you're a really good coach, you can make difference on people's technique, their tactics, their shooting in a pretty quick amount of time. We have players come in on day one, and then 2, maybe 3 weeks later, we've, shifted an entire group of people to play completely different tactics than what they were doing before, to use different skills on defense. Like, that's the timeline on skills. So again, like personality, meet them where they are. Skills, yes, if you're skilled in your craft of coaching it, you can get good change. And then values are kind of in the middle. And values are in the middle in a kind of a complicated way, because you've probably seen lots of different examples. You've already listed a few, like the All Blacks, where the organization bases its culture on values, right? So the organization is, coming up with its core values. And then anyone who comes into that, is really expected to learn, in a way, what the behaviors are that meet that kind of funnel up to those values. But if your values really don't align with it, like this happens all the time, like people, like this is like a retention issue in jobs. Like if values don't align, people are really serious about their values. So if they don't align, sometimes it just doesn't work out. And that's why I think it's such an important decision for coaches, or any leaders for that matter. You got to look at the timeline of these things and go, what hill am I really willing to die on? Like, are we trying to change something that needs to be better next week? Because talking about, their introversion in meetings and team settings is probably not the way to go. Like, for one, that's going to be the most threatening thing for them, because we're challenging who they are at their core. And 2, we know that takes years to change. So we have to try and look at the skills in that situation and start to figure out how can we build some glue in the skills between my personality and their personality, and our values and their values.
That's so interesting. And Bryce, when we think about kind of individual sports versus team sport, where we have a lot of teammates who are going to influence this leader follower, this culture that we're building along with the coaches, versus a sport like golf or tennis or canoe kayak, where you've got more of a single coach on athlete interaction. Any insights there, or perhaps experiences that you've had that highlight any kind of major differences, or even perhaps some insights from one side that we could bring to the other?
Oh, it's such a big opportunity in this space when you've got a one-on-one relationship. So if you've got, just really one coach and then one athlete who are, working together towards something really special, and that happens in canoe kayak, kind of like personal coach in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this incredible opportunity to basically, spend time on this weekly, even daily, if you're really committed to it, because it's going to be the gateway to your success in the end. Like, if you guys don't work on this, this would be my suggestion. And when I'm in the situation as kind of the third party working with a team that's an athlete, coach, and myself, when we're in this situation, we have to invest in this, because when it comes down to it, how you guys work together in the most difficult moments that we're going to experience, which lie ahead of us, is going to dictate our performance in that situation. So if it's just the two of you, we can go all in on this. We can figure out exactly we can do the personality testing. We can do a values identification. We can talk about the skills that will help glue all this together. I think you got to go all in that situation. Now, when you start adding people to the mix, that's where it gets really complicated. And that's why we build these like colorful maps of, we build like a personality map. So who's more introverted, more extroverted. And then that dictates how you choose roommates on the road, that, you're choosing your leadership group. There's a whole range of kind of ripple effect, I guess, of that in a team setting.
Yeah, and I imagine even, obviously we work in basketball primarily, and then as you zoom out to like a football team where you've got 50 individuals, and a lot of our nutritionist coaches listening in work in, American football, like what are some things to take into consideration, or some potential wins that could move the needle when the groups start to get that big, that obviously it's going to get more challenging to be able to sustain that culture and that leader-follower dynamic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a general principle, everything that, you implement from a coaching standpoint is kind of a rule until they know why. And then once they know why, it becomes a value. And people are more likely to be empathetic of values when they know the origin story of them. So, something as simple as like a coach wants the team to wear like all the same gear on a bus, let's say. And the coach is like, guys or girls, we're going to wear all the team gear on the bus. Thank you. Have a good day. And then leaves the room. Right. And then you hear like the chatter of the athletes, like, why do we have to do that? Like, wow, that's stupid. Like, I'm more comfortable on the bus in my sweatpants. I'm more comfortable on the bus in my track jacket. And so it became a rule, right? But the coach can turn that into a value if they attach an origin story to it. And great stories are what translate things into values. So storytelling becomes key in this way, and it really helps bring people together. So if the coach in that situation was able to share some example of when they were young and how much it meant to them, I heard a coach tell a story that was like, my dad played for this team, my grandfather played for this team. When I was given my first hoodie for this team, it was like the most emotional moment of my life because I wanted it so badly. And, you couldn't tell me to take it off, let alone convince me to put it on to go on a bus ride. So a story like that can help people understand, like, man, this is bigger than just, this rule of wearing it on the bus. And that's why pervasive values are so powerful. And by pervasive, I mean values that cross contextual boundaries. So, I'll give you two examples of this. Before we went to World Championships 2 years ago in Spain, we did an exercise called our personal philosophies. And basically what that was I gave everyone this huge list of values, like hundreds of values. And they were tasked, the athlete staff, everybody, not just coaches, the whole team, IST, everybody. Find your values from this list. What really, really resonates with you if you had to narrow it down to 5 values? Then I want you to take those values and I want you to write a personal philosophy statement. So your personal philosophy on excellence using these values. So all 5 of them have to be in there. So what we're trying to do there is link, how are you going to articulate in relation to what we're trying to do, why these things matter to you? That was the point of the exercise. Then we had every athlete when we got to Spain, and every staff, and this was time intensive, but we put together a slide for all of these presentations with pictures and photos that they sent us from home, anything that helped tell the story. And they had to share a moment from their childhood, a book they had read, and any other life experience that led them to have this personal philosophy with these values in it. And we thought it was going to be pretty good, and it turned out to be like unbelievable. Like the first 3 people who went on day 1, everybody cried. Like
Wow.
right away. It was like this moment where, you know, my dad or my grandfather or someone, you know, taught me this or showed me that. And then, you know, this book that I read, and then this other life experience. When you package all that together, it was like, man, there's some powerful stuff. People shared things that we would have never, ever found out. This is important because if someone on the team says, well, I really value respect, and someone else on the team is going, oh, I'm so sick of people saying respect. Like, it's such a fluffy, soft environment. Let's just go win. Like, and that happens. Like, as you know, that, you know, there's just very different characters in the room. So if you leave it there, you're in trouble. But if someone tells a story about why respect matters to them, and it's related to something that crosses contextual boundaries outside of the room we're in, you automatically have a higher chance of people being empathetic of each other's values. So that's what I mean by crossing contextual boundaries.
Yeah, that's tremendous. It's amazing how, you know, again, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, we're just so hardwired to take in information from story. And it's amazing how, whether it's passing along key information or just that from the emotional side, from that connectivity side, it's just such a powerful medium, isn't it?
Oh yeah, big time. It's necessary, and you got to find. I think you got to find a way to facilitate situations where everybody involved gets to share stories and talk about their, you know, their values and share their own personality tendencies. It can't be top down. It has to be inside out.
Awesome, Bryce. Well, listen, if we kind of segue a little bit here to managing things when we get into some of the social factors, some of the emotional factors, and obviously, you know, a great example there. But, you know, perhaps on the flip side, when we look at, again, emotions run high in sport, just as you mentioned. You know, a lot of different personality types in the room. Coaches, whether they're from a performance staff standpoint or the coaches coming in trying to establish a culture or a way of doing things. How can we approach some of these kind of social emotional factors? And, you know, in today's environment with COVID-19, you know, maybe that's another stressor, another element to this that we could throw in. You know, how do we start to manage those things? Or maybe you could share what are some of the more common ways in which things maybe start to derail on that front for teams?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can really only speak to, I guess, how I approach it and other things I've seen. We do our best to get measures in all 3 of these areas. So by that, I mean, you know, engaging in personality testing, engaging in values identification, engaging in mental skills assessments. So I think you have to show the people you're working with right away that, you know, all of these things are relevant, and we want to help you grow in all of these areas. And so again, I'll go from an environmental standpoint. We just try and set up an environment where it never gets stale. All 3 of these things, you know, in my pillar are being integrated every day in some way. So whether it's the sharing of those, you know, personal philosophies, or another day, you know, we might do mindfulness for half an hour. Like, and there's this is where these things run into each other. Is like, you know, as I said before, it's really difficult to build a skill in somebody who doesn't value that thing. And mindfulness is, in my opinion, and you know, in the opinion of science, one of the most powerful self-regulation processes that you can engage in. It literally changes, you know, it changes your brain in a matter of weeks in some cases. So mindfulness is really great. And from an evidence standpoint, you know, I want to do it as much as we can in our environment. But there's always that cultural barrier. There's always those people who are like, this is stupid. It doesn't matter how much science you show me, me sitting there and breathing for 30 minutes is not something I believe in. My family was hardcore. It was all about toughness, and I don't associate toughness and mindfulness. So these things are just constantly kind of like running into one another.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to try and, execute some strategies to what a lot of people call, buy-in, to help influence or kind of like, I guess, just kind of funnel these people to this place where they first, they'll start in a place of resistance. I resist mindfulness. There's certain behaviors that go with that. Then they'll move to a place of like tolerating or acceptance. I'll do it, but I don't believe in it. I'm not getting anything out of it. And then you're trying to get them to that place of mastery, where, it's like, I see that this is helping and I want to improve at this skill in and of itself, as well as the things that this skill is helping me improve on the court. So in the spirit of, your opening question there, I think mindfulness is a really key one. We spend a ton of time on that. The other one I would say from a skill building standpoint that I've found to be really effective is mental modeling. So by mental modeling, I just mean presenting people with some simple model that shows them how these things work, that is undisputed. So we use a mental model for emotions. And there's just certain players I just could not tap into for the longest time. And then when you present this mental model and talk about it in its stages, and then get them to share, kind of their own story in each of these stages of this model, it becomes really difficult for them to go, no, that's not me. Right? It's like, well,
sure.
This is all of us in a way. So those would be two big ones. Mental modeling I find really effective. Anytime you can apply a model to something that simplifies it into its phases or stages or steps is a positive thing.
That's terrific. Yeah, two great strategies there. And I remember an anecdote that someone had shared a few years ago at a conference, talking about Mike Boyle back when he was the strength coach for the Red Sox back in that time, and Big Pappy wasn't into the warm up routine, and it was impacting the ability of the other players to sort of do it. And he took him aside and said, "Look, I know I know this might not be your ideal way, but if you could just pretend like you're into it, everyone else will jump on board," or something to that effect. He sort of let him know that, look, this is important for everybody else, and I know that you're not that geared up to do it, but if you can go through it with a little more enthusiasm, then we can get everybody else. And just that conversation, like a light switch off and on. Then he said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And so it's amazing how some of those things can then drive everything else, right? But listen, Bryce, I appreciate you carving out so much time today. Last question for you is just around, we're living in a time now where we were gearing up for Tokyo 2020, and now athletes all of a sudden, that's not happening, and now it's going to be 2021. What's the mental, what are we dealing with here? Obviously a lot of emotions from athletes, but then how do we get athletes back on point, to go after a goal that was, not there even months ago. Now they have to reshuffle and retarget.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone's reshuffling in their own way. There's no cookie cutter, approach to this. So it's very individualized. Some people had really set plans in September, in some cases to retire. So rearranging all those retirement plans. But I think there's a lot of positives that are coming out of this, and you can train yourself to pay more attention to those positives. The skill, optimism. I view optimism as a skill. I think there's enough behind this term optimism to turn it into a skill. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but personalization, pervasiveness. There's certain components of being optimistic that we're starting to now teach athletes to make sure they're thinking in these ways. The other big part of this that I don't think people realized is, there's kind of like a really simple way to look at stress or pressure. There's an equation to it, and it's basically uncertainty times importance. And that kind of rings true for everybody, no matter what situation. Like if something's really uncertain, you don't know where the outcome is going to land, and that thing is really important to you. The combination of those is really powerful when it comes to stress.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, if something's uncertain, but you don't care how it turns out, then you don't get stressed. When that announcement was made to extend the Olympics by basically an entire year, that a lot of people saw that as not good or a big challenge, and it is motivationally, but it removed that uncertainty variable. So you're left with this this huge chunk of importance in your life, but at least it wasn't uncertain now. So I think a lot of athletes took peace of mind and being able to start to think more concretely about when it is.
Mm-hmm.
The one last piece I would add on that I think is so important for all the athletes in this situation to look at is to find the opportunities. I mean, it's basically, a threat mindset or a challenge mindset, or, some people call it challenge mindset. Some people call it opportunity mindset. And I think you got to sit down and take a look at what are the threats that came out of this. Those are very real. You can't avoid them. You got to embrace them. You got to know that they're there. But don't forget to make that opportunity list. Like, what is coming out of this that could benefit you, right? Like, how can you look at this and go, I can grow, I can improve, I can get stronger. There's a lot of opportunity that's coming out of this. And I think we just have to lean into that, as best we can. The motivation to train during the COVID isolation policies is probably the biggest hurdle.
It's tough to shoot when you don't have a hoop, right?
They're basically being asked to turn their homes into a training environment. So that's a really big challenge, and it's not equal. Not everyone has an equal opportunity to turn their home into a training environment. So those are some of the challenges, but certainly looking at the opportunities and understanding that the uncertainty part of that equation has been resolved. And so now you can kind of, dig your heels into knowing when the Olympics are going to happen.
Amazing, Bryce. Listen, I appreciate you carving out some time today. Tremendous insights. Where can people stay connected with you and keep up with all your great work?
Oh, great question. I do have a Twitter account. I'll go back to what I said about not being super active on social media. I'm just opening my Twitter right now to make sure I get the account.
Nice. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes for sure.
Yeah. So my Twitter account is probably the main one. Inbox in there, or however you want to engage. And then the Canadian Sports Center Atlantic is where all of my profiles on there in terms of my role with that group. So those are probably the two main ones.
Awesome, Bryce. Well, listen, looking forward to seeing you in Tokyo 2021, right?
You got it.
All right.
Thanks
take care,
so much
bud.
for having me on here.